Hey everybody, welcome.
How's it going?
We will give everybody just a couple more minutes to log in that wants to join the webinar tonight. For those of you guys that are already tuning in with us live, we'd love if you'd say hello in the comment section. You guys can use the chat box and just let us know if you're a student or a new grad or a clinician that's been practicing for a while. We love to know who our audience is. That way we can better tailor what we're teaching to you guys about travel therapy. Awesome. So it looks like we've got a couple PTA new grads, DPT new grads, DPT students. Awesome.
All right, ready?
All right. So we are going to share a little presentation with you guys as we go through our topic tonight and teach you about travel therapy and how to get started. Give us just a second, we'll get everything pulled up here.
All right.
Hang on just a sec. If you guys can just let us know, make sure you can see our screen, make sure you can see everything here as we get started. So it looks like mostly new grads and PT students here. So welcome guys, we're excited to have you. Awesome, okay. So we'll get started here. So for those of you guys who may not know us, my name is Whitney Eakin.
I'm Casazza.
And we're both traveling doctors of physical therapy. And we are the faces behind the Travel Therapy Mentor page. Some of you guys may know us from our Instagram page. We're on Facebook. And we also have our website, Travel Therapy Mentor. And tonight we're going to be talking about how to get started with travel therapy and how to become financially successful as a travel therapist.
All right, so a little bit about us. We graduated in 2015. We were from Roanoke, Virginia, Southwest Virginia. And we started as new grads. We've been traveling for about 6 years now. We've never had permanent jobs, which is kind of a crazy thing to a lot of people to hear. 6 years out of school, we've never worked permanent jobs. We lived in a fifth wheel camper for about 3 years. Here's a picture of the camper. We used that to travel around and live in, and that was it was an interesting experience. There were some pros and cons, but it was a lot of fun and something we look back on fondly now. Our preferred setting is outpatient ortho, which is we run into a lot of new grads and students that they want to work in outpatient, and there's like a lot of belief that you can't really find outpatient contracts, but that's not true. We've worked almost all outpatient contracts. We've worked in 4 different states now and currently are in Hawaii. So for us here, it's only 3 p.m. I know a lot of you guys, it's later than that. And we've mentored thousands of therapists and aspiring travelers at this point, help them get started. And that has been a primary focus of ours for a couple of years now.
So a little bit about why we're well suited to teach you guys about this topic tonight. We've actually used travel therapy to pursue financial independence, meaning that we only work part-time now, and Jared works even less than part-time just after a few years of practicing as travel therapists. And we want to teach you guys more about how we were able to utilize travel therapy to become so financially successful early in our careers and how you guys can do that too. So as you can see here, we worked full-time for 3 years as travel PTs. We emphasized our savings rate during that time. We focused on working back-to-back contracts those first 3 years with minimal time off so that we could front load our savings, put a lot into our retirement accounts early in our careers, and start to meet a lot of our financial goals early on. After 3 years of practicing full-time, we transitioned to what we now call semi-retirement. I usually work about 1 travel contract a year or 3 to 6 months of PRN. And Jared, like I said, works even less than that now because he's a lot more frugal than I am. And he's actually been able to save a lot more than I have in our few years of practicing. In our time as travelers, we have not only worked in just 4 states, but through road trips and time off between contracts, we've been able to travel to 46 of the US states so far. far, and over 30 countries internationally. And that's all through the flexibility of our travel therapy jobs and our schedule, because you can basically work a contract, take time off, work another contract, and you just don't have that flexibility when you take a permanent or a PRN job. So we've been able to really maximize our careers as travel therapists to have all these amazing experiences. And again, we've only been out of school for 6 years. So it's really amazing what we've been able to do. We have a personal blog that we started back toward the beginning of our travel career. It's called fifthwheelpt.com. And that's where we write a lot about our own journeys. We'll write a lot about our own adventures and trips. Jared also writes a lot about finances on our blog. So if you're interested in learning more about the financial aspects, student loans, investing, all that kind of stuff, you can find articles about that there. And then we also, after a couple of years of practicing as travelers, we started an online business, Travel Therapy Mentor, where we've been educating thousands of other students, therapists, current travelers, and aspiring travelers. Basically, when we started in 2015, there wasn't a lot of what you guys see now out there. There wasn't really a lot of Instagram accounts, Facebook accounts, blogs. There weren't all these people out here teaching you about travel like there are now. So we thought we would start something to be able to help others get off on a better foot than we did, because we had to learn a lot of stuff the hard way, unfortunately. So luckily for you guys now, we're here to show you the way and teach you everything that we've learned through experience, so you don't have to learn it the hard way.
So when people hear that we are semi-retired, we work very little now, we travel all over the world and stuff like that, most people think like, well, there's no way I could do that. They must have had some kind of advantage. In reality, we didn't. We graduated with a lot of student debt. We didn't have any help from parents. We're in a situation probably a lot of you guys are in now. We were 6 years ago. What we've done, it's completely replicable. The main thing is like, just get in a position where you can make extra money as a travel therapist, live pretty frugally, save a lot, invest intelligently. And it doesn't take long to get yourself in a very good financial position like we have. So don't look at our situation and think like there's something unique there. It really isn't. We've helped a lot of other people get in a similar position over the years as well. So you can use travel therapy for a variety of reasons. Our main reason now is flexibility, to be able to take time off, travel the country, travel the world. But a lot of people choose to travel to just make a lot of extra money and put that towards debt or investing. And some people choose to transition to part-time work later after their career, or they only work a couple contracts per year and spend that time with family, or, there's a variety of reasons why you'd want to be a traveler. So in this webinar, basically what we're doing is we want to give you a brief overview of travel therapy and being financially successful. And if you choose, we have a course also that goes much more in depth. It's 12 hours on all of this stuff, where it'll take you basically from knowing nothing about travel to being in a very good position to excel as a traveler and get in a good financial position.
Yeah, so we'll dive into teaching you guys basically about some of the basics of travel therapy, how you get started, some financial tips. And then again, if you guys are interested later in learning more about our course, we are going to offer a discount for just the people watching this webinar through Physiogram. We'll give you that discount code at the end. Just a quick disclaimer here, we're not financial advisors. Jared has done a lot of research over the years, and me as well, about learning about the different aspects of finance and how you can improve your personal finances. We've also done research on how the tax side of things works as a travel therapist, but we are not financial advisors, we're not tax advisors. So everything that we're going to talk about today is just meant to be education based on what we've learned. If you have specific questions about your own finances or your own taxes, we recommend consulting an advisor that is licensed in that area. So first we'll dive into talking about Travel Therapy 101, which is kind of just the basic overview of what travel therapy is and how it works and how you would go about getting started.
All right, so travel therapy, it's essentially just temporary contract work that you're doing outside of your home area. So say your home Southwest Virginia like us, any contract work you do outside of that, as long as you maintain a home in your tax home area, which we'll talk a little bit more about, that is what travel therapy work is essentially. Travel jobs are available throughout the country. Every state, for the most part, has travel jobs at one point or another. Some have way more than others, but most states have some contracts available. Why would a facility need a traveler? There's a variety of reasons. A big reason that we've seen in our own travels is that some of these facilities just have trouble keeping permanent staff because it's not a desirable area. So we find contracts a lot in more rural areas where not a lot of new grads are moving to, and there's not a lot of new therapists coming in there, but they still need to treat those patients. So they use travelers to fill that need. Another reason might be maternity leave, sick leave. They might have a new person that or a person recently that just left the job and they need to just fill that temporarily while they try to hire a new permanent staff. So there's a variety of reasons there. Why would a therapist travel? The big thing is, or there's a few different reasons, but one of the biggest reasons is the adventure aspect of it. That was a big thing for us when we started. I'd never lived more than 45 minutes from my hometown, so we really wanted to get out and see the rest of the country and see if there's somewhere else better to settle down. So a lot of people come out of school and they just want to see more of the country. Another thing is higher pay, like we mentioned. In general, we'll talk more about how pay works, but in general, you make about 1.5 times to 2 times as much as a permanent therapist working travel contracts throughout the year. Another big reason, our primary reason these days, is the flexibility. So being able to take long periods of time off to travel internationally or just take road trips around the country. And then another reason someone might travel, especially a new grad, is to get experience in different settings and try out some different facilities and see what you like and what you don't like.
So how does travel therapy work? Most travel therapists are going to work through a travel therapy company or agency, otherwise known as like a staffing company. This is the way that most travelers do it. This is the way that we've always done it. It makes it a lot easier when you go through a recruiter. They do a lot of the legwork for you. They do take a small cut of the pay to cover all of their expenses and costs, but in our opinion, that's way worth it for all the hassle of trying to find your own contracts, negotiate your own pay, figure out your own benefits, all that. So most travelers go through a staffing company. You could also be an independent contractor, which would mean you'd find your own contracts, but again, that can be a bit complicated, which is why most people don't do it. Or you could be an internal traveler, which means that you work only for one company, like say Kaiser. I don't know if Kaiser actually has one, but say Kaiser had an internal traveler program. You could just go to all the different Kaiser facilities, all their different hospitals or whatnot across the country. But the negative to that is that you're limited to only the locations that they have available. So you have less flexibility and choice in where you want to go. So again, most of us go through travel companies. The next step would be, deciding to go through which recruiter and which company. So that's one big thing that we get a lot of questions about is how do you find the right company and the right recruiter to work with? The real answer here is there's no one best company or best recruiter for every person out there. So over the years, we've interviewed dozens of different recruiters and companies to try to find good ones that we like and that we recommend to other people so that we can, best point you in the direction of, if you're looking for contracts in this area or you're only interested in these benefits, these companies might be good for you. So if you guys are interested, you can reach out to us to get our recruiter recommendations after the webinar. But next you'd want to go ahead and get in contact with some recruiters, and then we recommend working with 2 to 3 different ones. It's best not to just only narrow your choices down to one recruiter, because then you're not going to have as many options across the board for travel jobs. I saw that Colleen raised her hand. If you guys have any questions as we go through, feel free to just put them in the chat box. Let's see. Looks like Callie said, letting me know it's not in presenter mode. So do you guys mean, are you able to see? Okay, it is good now. Are you able to see the PowerPoint then? Yeah. And then if you have any other questions, just go ahead and put them in the chat box and we'll answer them toward the end. Thanks, Callie. All right, so after you've gotten in touch with a few recruiters, you would then want to work on getting licensed in each state. So it seems like most of you guys that are on tonight are PTs or PTAs. So luckily now, as physical therapists, we have the option to use what's called the PT Compact. Many of you guys may have heard of this. It really helps as a travel therapist to be licensed in multiple different states more easily, whereas you used to have to do it more the old school where you get licensed in each individual state. Now, the catch here is your home state where you have a driver's license has to be one of the compact states for you to be eligible. We get this question a lot. You can't just get a license in a compact state and then become eligible. Your home state has to already be participating. So if your home state is one of the, I think about 25 or 28 now that is participating, then you can take advantage of it. If your home state is not participating yet, hopefully they will join sometime in the future. But states like probably California and Hawaii, who knows when they'll join, but hopefully some of the other states will join. But you definitely have to acquire a license one way or the other in each state that you want to work in. And that would be the next step in the process.
All right, so going along with that, once you've found recruiters that you liked, you're licensed in states that you're planning to find jobs in, this is when you start the job search. That's where the recruiter is really instrumental. So like Whitney mentioned, the majority of travelers are going to go through a travel company and through a recruiter that helps you find contracts. They do keep a portion of the pay, but they make the whole experience way easier. They're the ones that do all the contracts. They set up the contracts, they find jobs, all that stuff. So that's the reason why most travelers go through a recruiter. It's a lot less hassle, and you have usually more consistent work. So you're searching for jobs. When you find a job, or the recruiter presents you with a job that sounds good to you, the pay sounds good, all of that, you'll have a phone interview with the facility. So usually the hiring manager, you talk to them. The important thing about this phone interview, though, is it's not like probably phone interviews that you're used to, where they ask you a bunch of hard questions. There are some like that, but the majority of our contracts, all but really one or two, has been an interview where basically they're trying to sell you on the facility, and you're asking them a lot of questions to make sure it's a good fit for you. And that's the smart thing to do as a traveler. That's what we teach everyone. You have to have a list of questions to make sure that the contract is a good contract, because there are some bad ones out there. Next, you interview, it sounds great. The manager sounds good. You sign the contract. This contract is through the travel company. And then there's a separate contract behind the scenes that the facility that you're going to be working with signs with the travel company. So there's actually two contracts. You only see the one with the travel company. And there's some things there in the contract that you want to have, some, depending on the situation, things like 40-hour guarantees where you're going to get paid no matter what. In terms of like, if census is low, you'd still get paid for 40 hours, and 30-day cancellation notice clauses and things like that. So there's some things in the contract that you want to make sure are there. The typical contract is 13 weeks. There are some that are longer and shorter. It just really depends on the needs of the facility and what you agree to as the traveler. Any contract length is possible if both parties agree to it. Once you accept the contract, you move into the new location. And in general, that's going to be driving to the new location. Very rarely are you going to fly unless it's like a Alaska or a Hawaii contract or something like that. Usually you're going to drive there. For housing as a traveler, this is a very common question we get. The company will find housing for you if you want them to. In general, probably at least 90% of travelers find their own housing. And the reason for that is if the company finds housing for you, they keep the part of your pay, the housing stipend that you would normally get. And that's usually a pretty big number. That could be like $500 or $600 a week that they would keep in order to find housing for you. So if you can find housing for less than the amount of the stipend, then you get to keep the extra money. So for most travelers, it makes a lot more sense, unless it's a really difficult area to find housing, to just find it on your own. And there's some options: short-term rentals, Airbnb, the RV, like we traveled in a fifth wheel for a while. Those are all options. You can usually find housing on your own. It just really depends on the area. In terms of benefits, it's important to remember that your benefits are through the travel company and not through the facility. So if you're working at a hospital that has certain benefits like vacation time, all that, you don't get those things because you're working through the travel company as the intermediary between you and the hospital or the facility. So that's important to remember. Your benefits come through the travel company, just like your recruiter or anyone else working at that company. And because of this, you're only employed while you're on contract. So you work, say, 13 weeks, your contract ends, you're not technically employed anymore. You're a free agent. You can go to a different company, you can take time off, you can do whatever you want to do. And that's kind of the beauty of travel. It's just 13 weeks at a time, and you figure out what you want to do from there.
Yeah, and a lot of people will choose to stay with the same travel agency contract after contract, because benefits is one thing that we get a lot of questions about. It is sometimes easier to do that so you can carry over your same insurance. Some travelers choose to carry their own private insurance so they don't have to deal with that hassle. But again, there's a lot of different options here, which we can teach you guys more about later in some of our other services. There's so much we could go into about benefits. All right, so one thing we want to make sure to touch on for you guys is understanding what a tax home is. We mentioned earlier, most travel therapists are going to travel while maintaining what's called their tax home. And this allows us to make more money as travelers. Why? Because the IRS is going to pay you, allow you to get your stipends tax-free. Your stipends are for your meals, your housing, and your incidental expenses. And as long as you're maintaining what they call a tax home and you're meeting all these rules, then they will allow you to get that money tax-free. However, if you're not maintaining the tax home, if you're not meeting the rules, then all your pay would be taxed, just like a regular employee. So again, there's a lot more research you guys need to do if you decide travel therapy is the right route for you. But as a basic overview here, what a tax home is, it is partially your permanent residence, but it's more than just an address. You can't just put down an address and say, yep, I have an address, here it is. You must also meet some other requirements, including having regular business or employment in the area. Business could be defined as registering your car there, having your driver's license there, your voter registration and things like that. Or it could be having a part-time job at home, some type of business in the area. You also want to have expenses. This is a really big one. You need to be paying expenses at your home. So if you just want to put mom and dad's address as your permanent residence, you would actually have to sign a lease with mom and dad and pay them rent. So you have to show that you're duplicating expenses both at your home location and at your travel location. Why? Because the IRS has no reason to give you a tax break if you're only paying for one residence. I like to explain the tax home situation. It's not just for travelers, it's for all kinds of employees. For example, a pilot. If a pilot travels away from home for work, they get tax-free stipends while they're away to pay for their hotel and their other expenses, but they're also still having to pay their mortgage and their expenses back at home. So it's the same thing for a travel therapist. You need to have a home base where you have expenses and then also have expenses at your travel location to meet the tax home rules. And the third rule is that you must not abandon that home. You must return there roughly 30 days a year. So you can't just go and work travel contracts for 2 years in a row across the country without ever returning home. If you guys want more information on understanding what tax homes are, we recommend visiting the website traveltax.com. I see we're getting a couple questions, which we will answer toward the end.
All right, so travel therapy pay, I'm sure a lot of you guys are interested in this. So like Whitney mentioned, a tax home is important. Yeah, like she said, the IRS makes these rules. It's not a travel company rule. Don't take your recruiter's word for it on things like if you qualify for a tax home. Make sure you're actually talking to a professional or you're very informed on the tax home rules and you're sure that you're meeting the requirements if you're taking non-tax stipends. So travel pay is broken down into basically taxed pay and non-tax stipends, as long as you have that tax home. So the hourly pay is usually a number somewhere around $20 to $25 an hour, which sounds very low. It is low, but the stipends make up for that. So a lot of times you'll get stipends. We'll go through actually a pay example on the next slide, I believe. But the stipends will sometimes be anywhere between like $1,800 to $1,200 a week after taxes. So that's a lot of money. For things like housing, meals, incidentals. Usually it doesn't actually cost that much. So that's just extra money that you're keeping. And that's what makes travel very lucrative. So travel is very different than like a permanent job or an hourly or salary permanent position. Because like, for example, if you were a salaried worker, you get paid the same every week, no matter what. Well, a traveler, it wouldn't make sense to do that because some travelers work 40 weeks a year. Some work 20 weeks a year. Some work 52 weeks a year. So you can't just get a salary for the entire year. And in terms of hourly pay, it doesn't work that way either because part of our pay is taxed and part of it's not taxed. The best way to refer to travel therapy pay is weekly take-home pay. And that's usually what should be quoted by recruiters. And if you go to any travel groups or any of our articles, that's how we always refer to pay. And basically the way you get the weekly take-home pay is to take that hourly taxed portion, subtract the taxes out, add in the stipends, and that gives you the total amount that you get in your bank account each week. That's your weekly take-home pay. So that is important to understand when you start talking to recruiters and they say like, all right, on this job, you'll make $1,600 a week. That's almost always a number that you get after taxes. That includes everything. In addition to that, you might get some reimbursements for the costs that you might incur getting to an assignment. So things like travel to and from an assignment. Maybe if you have to pay out of pocket for a drug test or something for a new assignment, they might reimburse you for that. To get a new state license, you might get a reimbursement for that in your contract. So say you get licensed in California to take a job there, you get a job, the travel company might be able to reimburse you for the license expense that you had to pay out of pocket. It's important to remember that with travel pay, all of the money comes from the facility that you're working at. They pay an hourly amount to the travel company. And then from there, that's what all this is broken down from. They take a percentage and they break down the rest into reimbursements, taxable pay, and stipends. And that's what you get paid.
So to go a little more in depth on pay here, the biggest question we always get is, well, how much money can I expect to make? So we want to give you some averages of what you might expect to see. So again, most of you guys on here are going to be PTs. The typical range that you could see for PT travel pay would be anywhere from $1,500 a week to $2,200 a week after taxes. but I will say most jobs tend to be more in that mid-range, more the like 1,500, or I guess technically on the lower end, 1,500 to 1,800 a week. The only place that you're going to see the 2,000 plus would be places like California, especially in the Bay Area. Some specific jobs in certain parts of the country, if they are really in dire need, they'll up the pay rate to get you there quicker. Certain settings like home health tend to pay more. For a PTA, since we have a couple PTAs on here, those numbers look more like 900 a week to about 1,300 a week. I think the highest PTA pay package I've ever seen, maybe in California, PTA home health will be 1,400 or 1,500, but still a significant more. So for comparison's sake here, because it's kind of hard to compare travel therapy pay to salary pay. A lot of you guys who may be considering salary jobs, maybe you're hearing annual salary numbers thrown around. So a typical new grad PT salary could be somewhere around, let's say 68 or 70,000 a year, especially on the East Coast and kind of in the middle of the country. So if we wanted to break that down into a weekly take-home number, the same way we break it down for travel therapy, that salary of 68,000 would be roughly $980 a week after taxes. So as you can see, it can be one, like Jared mentioned before, 1.5 to 2 times the amount after taxes as a traveler. Now, I will say you do have to take into account that as a traveler, you might have increased expenses and you might not work 52 weeks a year consistently. So you may not, at the end of the day, bring home twice as much, but you definitely can earn on a weekly basis twice as much.
So here's an example pay package. We've taken the majority of our contracts on the East Coast, Virginia, North Carolina, and this is exactly like a pay package that we've received before, to give you guys an idea of what it looks like. So hourly pay, ours is usually $20 to $21 an hour, and that's before taxes. So in this example, $21 an hour times 40 hours is $840 a week before taxes. In terms of stipends, for this pay package, it would be about $1,000 a week, and that includes stipends for housing, meals, and incidentals. If you add those together, your gross pay is $1,840. If you take out the taxes from that hourly amount, remember you're not being taxed on the stipends, that would leave you with a take-home pay of somewhere around $1,630 a week. And that's it's very average pay range for East Coast. You can make a little more than that in like California, like Whitney said, but most of our contracts have been probably in the $1,600 to $1,800 a week range. So that's very normal for the East Coast. So this is exactly the type of pay package you might see as a traveler. So assuming that you work 52 weeks a year, most travelers don't do that. We did that actually for a couple of years. That would be about $84,000 to $85,000 a year after taxes. And if you equate that to a salary position pre-tax, that's about $120,000 to $125,000 a year. So, that's significantly more than most therapists make, especially most new grads. So that's a big reason that a lot of new grads choose to travel, is you can make a lot more money there.
Absolutely. And it's always so important when you're looking at pay and understanding pay. Make note of whether it's net pay, which means after tax, or gross pay, which means before tax. Typically, when you're talking to anyone about a salary, that's always quoted as gross pay. So whenever someone says, I make $75,000 a year, that's before taxes. So that's why we calculated it backwards here for you guys to see that this $1,630 a week after taxes would be about the equivalent of over $120,000 gross salary.
Yep.
So hopefully those numbers make sense. But again, if you guys are struggling to understand this concept, we have a lot of articles and additional videos where we explain this more in depth. And I think it helps if you guys get out a calculator and run pay packages, run some of the numbers to better understand how much money you could make for this job versus that job. All right, so a common question, since I know a lot of you guys on here are students and new grads, is should you pursue travel therapy as a new grad? As we mentioned, we started right away as new grads. We've done it our whole careers. We have no regrets. There's a lot of travelers who do it as new grads and have a great experience. But unfortunately, there are a lot of travelers that start as new grads that do have a bad experience. And then they end up going into a permanent job and they say, travel therapy was terrible. I hated it. It wasn't for me. And then they go online and tell everybody, you shouldn't travel as a new grad. So it definitely is not for everyone. And that's why we always want you guys to know the pros, the cons, the good, the bad, and know what to expect when you get into it. It depends on a lot of factors, and it depends on you as an individual. Some things that you would want to consider within yourself if you would decide if this is a good option for you as a new grad or not. You want to know about how confident you felt during your final clinicals. Did you feel pretty good finishing up your clinicals? Do you feel like you're ready to hit the ground running as a clinician when you start out? There are opportunities to find some mentorship, but not always. So you definitely want to feel pretty good about your skill set when you get started as a traveler. You also want to know whether you feel pretty adaptable, because you're going to have to adapt to different clinics, different staff members, different documentation systems. If you're someone who had trouble catching onto that during clinicals and you always struggled when you switched from one 8 or 12-week clinical to the next, travel therapy may not be right for you right away as a new grad until you get on your feet a little bit more. But if you're somebody who can just roll with the punches, hop right in there and make the best of a situation, it might be a good opportunity for you. You're also going to have to be adaptable to the new area. You're going to be moving often. You may not know anybody in the new area you're going to. Again, as Jared and I mentioned, we worked a lot near our home state in Virginia and North Carolina. So we were never that far from family. That is an option for a lot of new grads. We recommend, start with a job in your home state or nearby. If you're not feeling very confident, don't just up and move to Alaska. Don't move all the way across the country for your very first job. You can kind of dip your toes in, but you do need to feel like you're going to be adaptable to moving around a lot. And then also comes with that just the hassles of moving. If you're somebody who hates to move, hates to pack, all those things, it may or may not be right for you, but that's just kind of, you take the good with the bad with travel. And as I mentioned with clinical mentorship, there are opportunities as a traveler to find mentorship. We always recommend, if you're a new grad, to ask in your interview with the facility if there's going to be another person of your same discipline there, so that you have an opportunity to bounce ideas off of someone or ask questions if need be. That was a big criteria for us when we were new grads, is we asked that question. I did end up with one job when I was a relatively new grad where I was the only PT there, and that was a really bad experience. And that was probably a job I shouldn't have taken. Looking back now, I wouldn't have taken it. So that's a really important thing to ask. You can find mentorship. Jared had great mentorship at his first travel job. He had the opportunity to shadow multiple PTs, multiple PTAs, really had a slow ramp up on his caseload. So it's possible, but you have to ask the right questions during the interview.
Yeah, along with that, you have to remember that every contract is very different. So it's not just a blanket thing like, do you get mentorship as a traveler? It really depends on where you're at, what the facility is, and what the culture is like there.
Absolutely. And then the last little bullet point here is PT versus PTA. I know we have a couple PTA or PTA students on here. We generally don't recommend that new grad PTAs jump into the travel market until they get a little bit of experience. The reason for this is that the travel PTA market is a lot more competitive than the PT market. For example, at some points in time over the last several years, there might be 500 or 600 or 700 PT jobs across the whole country to choose from. That's a big, pool of jobs to pick from. Whereas for PTA, there might only be 20 to 100 jobs across the whole country. So you're competing with a lot of experienced PTAs. And so jobs that are likely to pick you as the new grad, they may not be a really good fit for you. It might be a really bad clinic where they're very desperate. So they're willing to take a new grad PTA over, another candidate, or they just don't have another candidate. So we don't always think it's the best idea because of the competition level for a PTA to start as a new grad. It's usually best to get 6 to 12 months of experience.
All right. So to be successful as a new grad, there's some keys for sure. Then we've learned this over time, not only with our own experience, but talking to hundreds of other people that started as new grads. Before you start, the most important thing is to get a broad clinical experience. We have a lot of students reach out to us and ask this question: how can I prepare for travel? Try to get experience in multiple settings if at all possible, because as a traveler, there are jobs in every setting and in every state. And so if you have more experience and you're able to choose from more jobs, it'll make it a lot easier on you as a traveler. So if you have some home health experience and some skilled nursing experience and outpatient, you have more job options than someone that just had like 3 outpatient clinicals or something like that. On your last clinical, make sure that you feel pretty confident. So what we both did, we knew that we were going to travel as new grads. We went into our last clinical. We told the clinical instructor, we plan on traveling. Please let us test ourselves, basically. We want to be as independent as possible. Maybe the first week is like a ramp up, and then I want to be independent after that. And I want to make sure that I feel confident going into a new clinic after this experience. So, be honest with your clinical instructor, have that experience, see how it feels for you. If you feel good with it, then, maybe travel is for you. If you feel like you needed a lot of help, maybe get some experience first. And that's a good way to test yourself. A very, very important thing is to do your research on travel. We've talked to dozens and dozens of travelers now that had a bad experience, and they say they didn't like it at all. the common thread with that, I would say 90% or more of those people went into it with very little knowledge about travel. So they just reached out to a recruiter. They said, I want to travel. The recruiter said, okay, I've got this job. They took the job. It was a bad job. That happens all the time. So go into it with as much knowledge as possible. Don't get just put in a bad situation because the recruiter says, well, I have this job. You can take it or you can leave it. That's never the case. So make sure you do your research and learn as much as possible before you start traveling. And then the big thing too is to find trustworthy recruiters. There's some recruiters out there that definitely do take advantage of travelers, especially new grads that don't know that much. So don't be taken advantage of. Find good recruiters. We mentioned earlier, we help a lot of people find good recruiters. We interview a ton to find the ones that we like. So just reach out to trustworthy people that will have your best interest in mind and not just try to force you into contracts so they make as much money as possible.
And again, going back to the research part about learning as much as you can, getting connected with the right recruiters, that's why we do everything that we do, is to help you guys, get off on the right foot to start. And that's why we created our course, is to give you guys a step-by-step guide on how to get started so you can answer all these questions that you have before starting. Otherwise, you kind of have to learn the hard way. Like, you'll get into a contract and then you'll realize, wow, I didn't make as much money as I should have made that contract, or this went really south, or, when I got to the clinic, it wasn't at all like what they said it was going to be on the interview.
Yeah, I didn't ask the right questions in an interview. That's a very, very common thing.
So it's really important to do your research in advance and understand more about the world of travel therapy. And that's where we can help you guys out with our course and our other resources.
Yep. So on your first placement, if you do choose to travel as a new grad or just as a traveler in general, it's a good idea to choose the setting that you're most comfortable with at first, at least to get your foot in the door and to get the experience as a traveler and build some confidence. If you're working in a setting that you're familiar with, it makes the transition much easier than if you say are a new grad, you have no experience in skilled nursing and you take your first contract in skilled nursing. It's going to be pretty tough on you. Also, like what you mentioned earlier, make sure there's at least one therapist of the same discipline as you on staff. That'll help not only with things like treatment ideas for patients if you get stuck on something like that, but also with things like questions about the documentation system. If you're the only PT there and all the rest of the staff is PTAs and you don't understand how to document an eval, like there's no one there to answer your question. So it's a good idea to have someone else there, an evaluating therapist, if you're a therapist, to make sure that you have someone to bounce ideas and things off of. And then in addition, you might want to ask about mentorship. This is like Whitney said, it's not always going to be available, but you can ask those kind of questions. You can find assignments where it is, but those assignments are a little more competitive and not as easy to come by. But that's always a good thing to ask as a new grad, is like, it's kind of a delicate balance because you don't want to sound like you don't know what you're doing. You don't want to be like, well, is there going to be someone there to help me? But at the same time, you probably don't want to go into a situation where the only other therapist there just has no interest at all in answering questions. So you can bring that up kind of in the interview and let the evaluate or the hiring manager know, like, I'm very confident, but it would be nice if there was someone else there that, could answer questions or give me advice every now and
then. Yeah. And sometimes you'll find that there would be other PTs on staff, or sometimes they'll have like a sister building or somewhere else that they have another location where you could call someone on the phone. Similarly, a lot of the travel companies will offer mentorship opportunities where they have someone that you can call on the phone. It might be like a current or a former traveler, or sometimes they have a person who's hired by the staffing company to be a clinical liaison, who's an experienced clinician that you can bounce ideas off of, that is unbiased. So they don't work at the clinic where you work at. That way, if you run into something like you're feeling like there's something unethical, or you're just not sure about like the way they're asking you to do billing and things like that, you could speak to someone on the phone who could give you advice. So there are mentorship opportunities out there, but you just need to make sure to ask the right questions. So switching gears a little bit, that gives you guys a good overview, I hope, of what travel therapy is, how you would kind of go about getting started with the process and the steps that you would have to take. Let's talk a little bit more on the financial aspect and how you would become financially successful as a traveler, because to be quite honest, not all travel therapists do come out ahead financially. There are certain therapists that go into travel therapy thinking, I just want to, hit those bucket list places and see a few things, and only do it for like a year or 2 years. And then I'm planning to settle into a permanent job. And they don't necessarily make all the wisest financial decisions, which is okay, because maybe their priority was, again, just to have those experiences. But if your priority is to, pay off your student loans, start investing early in your career, we can teach you some of those things so you can be financially savvy. Whereas we've met a lot of travelers that just, they meet their increased spending, their increased income with increased spending. Like they just spend all the extra money because they're out buying things all the time and all that. So we're going to teach you guys how to be financially savvy.
All right. So like we've mentioned a little bit here, the financial benefits of travel therapy in general: higher pay, usually 1.5 to 2 times as much. The tax benefits of tax-free stipends and reimbursements, that can be very beneficial. A lot of travelers choose to just travel for a few years, put all their money towards student loans, pay those off, then settle down into a permanent job and just not have to worry about loans. So a lot of people specifically go into travel to pay down student debt quickly. There is the option, which we chose to do, of going on an income-driven repayment plan. This is something that is a very individual decision, not for everyone. There are some advantages of being a traveler to going on an income-driven repayment plan because not all of our pay is taxable. The stipends don't count as taxable income. So when you're calculating your income-driven repayment amount, it's very low for travelers. So there are situations where you might come out ahead, and we've come out ahead by going on an income-driven repayment plan and investing money instead of just paying down debt, but that is something that you'd have to decide for yourself. It also gives you the option to invest early in your career, which is extremely important to take advantage of compound interest. So already 6 years in, we invested a ton our first year. That money that we invested back then has already grown a lot. The market has done very well since we graduated, and it's grown a ton since then. So investing early in your career, that's going to be massive by the time, 30 or 40 years from now. For us, that money invested early is going to be very important. Some people choose to just travel to save up for a down payment on a house, in order to settle down somewhere, buy a house, put 20% down, that kind of thing. Also, if you're planning to have kids, it's always nice to save a little extra money early in your career. And then you can use it to pay off extra debts like credit card debt. Some people accumulate credit card debt in PT school, or car loans, those kind of things. Use the extra money to pay down those debts.
Yeah, so as you guys can see, tons of financial benefits, again, if you're smart with that money. So that's one thing we want to talk to you guys about, is ways to not only make more money as a travel therapist, but ways to save the most money as a travel therapist. And again, this is a huge focus of our travel therapy course, because you can get started as a traveler. It can be as easy as just contacting a recruiter, getting a job, and going and working that job. But there's ways to be more savvy than that and try to save the most. So the way that we did it is we limited unwanted time off between contracts. 3 key points here: limiting unwanted time off between contracts, searching for higher paying contracts, and keeping your expenses low. So in order to limit unwanted time off between contracts, because time off means time unpaid. Now, there are some opportunities, when you get to the position we are, where you might want to take time off for fun to go and do things, but you're not getting paid during that time off. So in the beginning, if your goal is to save as much as possible, trying to work back to back to back contracts without having to take time off is going to be one way that you can do that. So some ways that you can strategize is get licensed in advance in each state. This is going to prevent you from having to wait for the license to come through. Sometimes if you apply for a job, like say you apply for a job in Texas, but you don't have a Texas license yet, the company might accept you, but then you might be waiting a couple of weeks until your license comes through. And that means you can't start for a couple of weeks. So now you've got 2 or 3 weeks off where you're not getting paid, and that's missing out on $1,500 to $1,800 a week that you could have been making if you could have started, earlier when you wanted to start. The second thing would be work with multiple recruiters so they can help you with your job search. If you're only working with one recruiter and they just keep saying, sorry, I don't have the jobs you want. Sorry, I don't have the jobs you want. That's crazy. You need to open up your options to other recruiters, because this other recruiter over here could have had you working 2 weeks ago. The third thing would be be as flexible as possible on settings and locations if you need to find a job quickly. It's great if you really just want that one job in that one location, but if your goal is to make as much money as possible, you might need to settle a little bit on either the setting or the location to go ahead and get started working as quickly as possible to keep the money coming in each week. And we've always been like with our travel job searches, when we are about 6 weeks out from looking for our next job, we try to have our ideal situation in mind. We want this location, we want this setting, we want the highest pay possible. But when it starts getting down to the wire and we're like, oh gosh, we only have 3 weeks left on this contract and we need to start the next one soon so we can keep the money coming in, then we might start swaying a little bit on our criteria, right? Like maybe we only wanted 2 outpatient jobs. But now it's getting down to the wire and we're like, okay, what if it was like one outpatient job and one skilled nursing? We'll consider it. So being a little bit more flexible will help you to maintain consistent employment, which helps you to keep consistent income. Obviously, the second point here, searching for higher paying contracts, duh, right? Like if we can all make the most money, that's the best thing. So how are we going to do this? Again, it goes back to having multiple recruiters so you can compare pay options, because if you only have that one recruiter, they might just be offering you, the best they have, but maybe this other company has something better, but you won't know unless you talk to another company. You also want to make sure to let your recruiters know your priorities. If you're someone, and we've talked to many travelers this way, that all you want to do is make sure that you're making 18 or 2,000 plus a week, you're like, I'll go anywhere, I'll take any setting, let them know that. So then they'll be like, hey, I've got this $2,000 a week contract in Montana. Are you interested? And you're like, yes, give me that job, I'll take it. So let your recruiters know your priorities if making the highest pay is your priority. And again, it means that you're going to have to maybe be more lenient on setting and location. Those are basically the three factors for travel therapists: setting, location, and pay. Sometimes you get all three of your choices. Sometimes you might only get two. And then the third point here, which I think some travelers unfortunately overlook, is keeping your expenses low. And this means your expenses at your travel contract and your expenses back home, your fixed expenses. So for your travel contracts, you might want to consider lower cost of living areas. While you can make the most, say in San Francisco, you're also going to pay the most in rent. So say you're making, $1,900 a week in San Francisco, but your rent is $2,000 a month. We've worked jobs in rural places on the East Coast where we were making $1,850 a week, really close to those high-paying California contracts, not quite 2,000, but 1,850. And our rent was pennies on the dollar compared to what the rent would be out in the West Coast.
Yeah. Also, things like gas prices are less, food prices are less, everything's less. So, if you're a financially savvy traveler, think about not only how much you make, but how much you're able to save by taking into account the expenses in the area of the contract.
Absolutely. So lower cost of living areas, cheaper housing. We know some therapists that are willing to continue to live a little bit like they're still students for a while, just to be able to save as much money. And that might mean they're willing to live with roommates or like rent a room in a house instead of paying to rent your whole one-bedroom apartment. You're going to save a lot of money if you're willing to rent a room in a house so that you can attack those loans, start investing early, and meet your financial goals. And again, going back to keeping your fixed costs at home low, those people who rent a room in a house, like at their mom and dad's house as their tax home, save a lot more money in the long run than the people who have a mortgage and are having to pay all these fixed expenses at home. But you also want to consider things like, do you have a car payment, like a high car payment, insurance, your cell phone bill, all those types of things. So trying to keep your expenses as low as possible is going to help you take home more money at the end of the day. And the last thing would be just trying to live frugally. But we do want to emphasize in our first 3 years of being travelers, we lived pretty frugally and we did a lot of these things to cut down on our costs and make the most money. But we didn't skimp on experiences. We were still having amazing experiences every weekend. We just chose to do a lot of things that didn't necessarily cost a lot. Like we like to do hiking, going to national parks, going and exploring. But we would try to minimize, like, don't eat out too much, don't drink out too much. Maybe just reserve that to like one day a week, just things like that. But keep in mind your priorities. Don't miss out on the fun opportunities while being frugal. But there's ways that you can cut costs.
All right, so just a basic overview of personal finance. We got about 10 minutes and we're going to try to go through some questions. So personal finance in general is actually very simple. It all comes down to your income minus your expenses, and that leaves you basically with your savings rate. So that's all of personal finance. You're trying to essentially maximize your income, either through your full-time job, your travel contracts, side hustles, things like that. Maximize your income, and you're trying to reduce your expenses. And the more you can do that, the more you can put the money that's left over towards productive uses, things like paying down debt or investing, in the stock market, rental properties, whatever you choose to invest in, but using that money productively. The savings rate, the higher your savings rate, the faster you can reach a point of financial independence, which is what we were shooting for basically from the very beginning. It took me about 4 years to get to basically a position of financial independence, which our definition is about 25 times your annual expenses. So the more you can save, the higher your savings rate, the faster you can get to a position where you can make work optional, which is, the ideal for everyone. You can work if you want to, you don't have to. So if you were saving about 20% of your income, that takes you about 37 years to get to retirement. If you're saving 70%, it takes about 9 years. If you're saving 90%, it takes about 3 years. So keep that in mind. The more you can save, the quicker you can get to a point where work is optional and you're not forced to work if you don't want to. So along with your savings rate, like I said, you're putting that money towards productive uses, either increasing your assets or paying down debts. And if you take your assets, your total assets, everything that you own, and you subtract your debts, everything that you owe, that leaves you with your net worth. And personal finance is all about increasing your net worth over time. So you track progress on that, try to get that number, increasing as quickly as possible. And that's how you get in a very good financial position.
All right, so just to wrap everything up here, for those of you guys that are thinking about pursuing your own travel therapy career, a little bit about how would you go about getting started?
All right, so the main thing here is start by doing your research ahead of time. Like I mentioned, that is vital. That really separates people that have good experiences from people that have bad experiences. So plan ahead, read as much as possible, learn as much as possible so that you have a good experience as a traveler. You can utilize our resources. We have, I think, over 100 articles now and probably over 100 hours of video on traveltherapymentor.com. Also on our Instagram, we're always talking about travel therapy, and on our Facebook page. Consider enrolling on our course. This really, like we said, this is an A to Z from knowing nothing to getting in a position to travel and be very financially successful with it. We're confident that the course will more than pay for itself, probably pay for itself exponentially over your travel therapy career if you travel for a few years. So consider that. You can use the discount code that's coming up at the end. You get $150 off the course. So that should be helpful for you guys. And then a very important thing we mentioned earlier, get connected with some trusted recruiters that will be, very good for you in your situation, that will not take advantage of you, not try to pay you the least that they possibly can, that want to keep you around as a traveler for a long time. And you can contact us for those recommendations.
All right, so a little bit about our course that we've kind of alluded to here. Our course is titled Becoming a Financially Successful Travel Therapist, the comprehensive guide to start and succeed in your travel therapy career. And I'm going to show you a brief overview of what the course is. And then here's the code that you guys can use to save on our course. So especially for you guys who watch this webinar, we want to thank Physiogram for having us and hosting this webinar. You guys can use the code SUPERPHysio. It's all one word, all lowercase, when you check out on the course website to get $150 off the course. And I'm going to open the website here just to give you guys a brief overview, and then we want to take some questions that you guys have been asking. We're just going to show you kind of what the course looks like to know what you guys would be signing up for. All right. So hopefully you guys can see the screen here. Real quick, make sure I'm on the right one. Yep. Let me know if you guys can see the screen here. So it's called Becoming a Financially Successful Travel Therapist. Here's an overview of the course. Oh, and then somebody asked how much is the course. Let us know if you can see the new screen share I just did that shows you the overview. The price for the course is $549, and then if you use the discount code SUPERPHysio, you'll get it for $399. And again, as we mentioned, you're going to more than make up for the cost of this course in hopefully just your first contract by using all of our advice to make the most and save the most on your first travel therapy contract and then throughout your career. So the course includes 12 hours of video lessons. We go through getting ready to travel, like all the step-by-step guide of the things that you need to prepare to travel. We talk about how to work with companies and recruiters, which includes questions to ask them. We go into greater detail about tax homes, finding housing. We break down pay, talk about negotiating for pay. We go over insurance and benefits, how to get licensed in each state, the whole job search process. We teach you about phone interviews and things to ask during your phone interview with the facility to make sure that you're prepared, accepting a job offer, the next steps, packing, moving, considerations while you're on contract, so things that can come up, long-term planning, considerations for pairs, and then a huge section on financial strategies. I think it's like a 2-hour section on financial strategies, which goes into a lot more details on personal finance for you guys to help you be financially successful. We also offer a one-on-one mentorship call at the end of the course and a Facebook group for ongoing mentorship. We've gotten all 5-star reviews. You guys, for everything, all the people who've gone through our course so far, they've really been appreciative. And a lot of the experienced travelers that took our course said, like, the number one comment that we loved was, I wish this was available when I started, because so many of them said they had to learn everything the hard way, unfortunately. And that's what we want to help you guys avoid, is learning things the hard way. So again, the discount code is SUPERPHYSIO. If you guys want to save $150 on the course. So we have about 5 minutes left. We do want to go through some of you guys' questions. If you have additional questions, leave them in the chat or the Q&A. All right, so let's hop back up here to our beginning questions. Callie wants to know, if you have benefits through an independent party, can you negotiate with your travel company to keep the extra pay? Good question. We just talked about this actually with somebody who asked it earlier. There are certain situations where that might be the case, but I think technically it's kind of illegal for them to offer you more money if you don't take the insurance.
Definitely a legal gray area.
It's a gray area, so maybe is the question, is the answer. Sorry, we're having a little bit of trouble with the chat box here. It's going finicky. Okay, so Stephanie wanted to know, this was about the tax time rules, returning home 30 days a year. Does it have to be 30 days in a row?
No, it does not.
No, it does not. It can just be any time throughout the year. Do PTs tend to make more money on the East Coast versus the West Coast, excluding California, since they seem to have quite a high cost of living?
California is definitely the highest paying state. Also, Alaska pays very well. But in terms of like Washington, Oregon, I think probably they pay a little bit higher than the East Coast, but it really depends on the specific contract. They're pretty comparable overall.
It doesn't actually have to do as much with the cost of living as it does with the reimbursement for our services. So however much the facility is able to pay has to do with how much they're able to get reimbursed for their services from the insurance companies. And California has some of the highest reimbursement in the country. Does take-home pay include insurance and benefits, or would I have to pay that out of my take-home pay myself?
The take-home pay will almost never include any sort of benefits, because travel companies have a variety of options for like health insurance. Usually there's like 3 options, so they don't know which one that you'll pick. So that's something that comes out of the pay after you're quoted the take-home pay number.
Mentorship through travel companies, we covered that. They usually have somebody you can call. If you have multiple recruiters, how often do you pay for them? Do you pay all of them simultaneously, or do you just continue to pay the one that got you the job? So interestingly, you don't pay your recruiters. Everything that they do for you is free, kind of like everything that we do upfront, except for our course is free. Like, you can talk to them continuously for free, and then they would just get a commission if you end up taking a job with them. But if you don't end up taking a job with them, you never pay them any money. They would just take it out of your contract.
Yeah. So they're keeping a percentage of whatever the facility is paying the company, and that's how they get paid.
Are we able to access the slides after the webinar? So I believe that Physiogram is going to repost this webinar at a later time. So pay attention on their page to see if we'll have access to the webinar later. We did insert the link, traveltherapy.com, traveltherapy.thinkific.com, also here in the chat, and then the code SUPERPHYSIO to get $150 off. Thanks, Cynthia. Okay, April Duke said, I got offered my first travel PT contract today. Congratulations. I haven't accepted, still doing my research. It says there's a 32-hour guarantee. I've heard to aim for a 40-hour guarantee. Should I not accept this contract because of that?
Yeah, the 40-hour guarantee is always better. Some facilities just will not agree to that for whatever reason, say their census is not very high. They don't think you'll be there 40 hours. So you can always try to do that. I wouldn't say it's a deal breaker if everything else sounds great. So if it's a high paying contract and, the caseload's good and the manager seems good and it's a location you want and all those things, it wouldn't be a deal breaker, but it is something to consider. You might want to go with one that has a 40-hour guarantee.
We are coming up right on the top of the hour. We're happy to hang around for just a few more minutes, as long as our webinar isn't going to cut off automatically, and answer the rest of your questions. So feel free to add any additional questions. We'll hang out for another 5 or so minutes. But just as we wrap up here, reminder, if you guys have more questions, you can find us on Instagram at Travel Therapy Mentor, on Facebook, Travel Therapy Mentor, on our website, traveltherapymentor.com. If you are interested in the course, use that discount code to save, get the course for $399. One-time payment, you get lifetime access to it. It's at traveltherapy.com or traveltherapy.thinkific.com. All right, so a few more questions here, guys. How has your experience been with finding jobs while traveling together? Is it harder to find jobs since you require being placed in the same area? Have you ever been in the same clinic?
It is harder to find jobs, but you can definitely do it. We haven't had that much difficulty with it. It really depends on what you're looking for in terms of location and setting, but it is obviously harder because you do need two in the same area. There are situations where we've been in the same clinic, probably about, I don't know, 30 to 40% of the time we're in the same clinic, but usually it's just two different clinics within 30 or 45 minutes of each other.
Would you recommend someone being a travel PT only in a specific region? I don't plan on being anywhere except for in the Pacific Northwest or California. My wife is helping out right now while I'm in PT school. Then it'll be my turn. Wondering what your thoughts are.
Yeah, you can do a specific region. It's a lot harder if you only want to be in one state, but if you have a few states that you can look for jobs in, like for example, us, all but two of our contracts ever were in Virginia or North Carolina, and we took a lot of contracts. So you can definitely do that. It just really depends on the specific states, but Pacific Northwest and California, they definitely have a lot of jobs. Oh, wait, you said besides?
No, he's talking about doing Pacific Northwest and California.
Yeah, so you can definitely find jobs there.
Yeah. It's harder if you only want to do like one city. Like if you only want to be in the Portland area, that would be hard. But if you have flexibility to 1 to 2 to 3 states, you can definitely open up your options.
How fast can you start a new contract after ending another? For example, end a contract on Friday and start a new one on Monday. Yeah, you can definitely do that. A lot of our contracts we ended on Friday, started a new one on Monday. As long as you're not driving across the country or something, you can definitely make that work. You just have to be smart about your planning process and moving and being on top of it to make sure you get there in time.
Kelly wants to know, are there more outpatient ortho contracts compared to neuro? Yeah, you're going to see more like general settings. So you'll typically see just like general outpatient listed, and it's mostly going to be ortho with like a splash of, neuro or TMJ or balance or vertigo, like just a little bit of that stuff. We don't as often see specialty jobs like neuro, outpatient or pediatrics. Every now and then you see it, but those jobs are usually pretty well staffed from permanent therapists. You normally just see like a general ortho, outpatient, or general acute care.
Isaiah says, do y'all recommend taking PRN jobs on the weekends during travel assignments? Really up to you. You already get paid very well as a traveler. I've taken PRN jobs and worked on the weekends or in the evenings to make extra money, but by no means do you have to do that. It just really depends on if you want to get experience in a different setting or you want to make extra money, then it's great to do.
And sometimes it's hard to find, but if you can find a connection like at your facility, that's how Jared found his PRN job. Some of the people at his job already worked PRN at the skilled nursing facility, which was right across the street. So if you have a connection and it works out, great, but you won't always be able to find like a short-term PRN job.
Are there certain qualities that potential hires would like to see that set you above others applying? I think confidence is probably a very big thing. So when you're on the phone with a manager, you want to sound confident. I actually, as a new grad, didn't get a job just because they said I didn't sound confident enough. So there's definitely managers looking for confidence. They want, especially as a new grad, they want someone that they feel like they can trust to come in and be independent with the patients. So confidence is a big thing. Also, obviously experience in the setting that you're applying for. So getting a broad range of experiences in your clinicals will help you get contracts in those settings.
How long will the discount code be active? As of right now, we plan to have the discount code active through the end of the year. So if you're not sure, you can wait to do it. However, if you want to go ahead and lock in the discount now in case we decide to discontinue it, we haven't worked out all the details, you will have access. So if you go ahead and sign up now, you'll have access indefinitely. So even if you're not ready to start the course until like say after you take boards or later this year, you can lock in the discount now and start the course later. We've had a lot of people doing that.
How often would you say it happens for a clinic to drop a travel therapist from their location? It's not as common as you might think by looking in some of the groups and people complaining and things. For example, for us, I think we've taken between the two of us probably close to 30 contracts now, and we've only had one that was ever canceled early. So there are situations where you might have bad luck and you have two canceled back to back, but it's not, in our experience, not that common. So not something you should really worry too much about, but it's always a consideration.
All right, we're going to take the last few questions here. And then again, if you guys have more questions after the webinar ends, feel free to reach out to us on Instagram or Facebook, but we'll answer these last few.
The clinics usually give you a grace period to allow you to acclimate to their documentation system. It's very dependent on the contract. I would say most you get at least half a day or a day to learn the clinic and learn the documentation system, but that is very important to ask on the interview. Make sure that you say, am I expected to just have a full caseload on the first day, or is there going to be some kind of ramp up period? And for the most part, if it's a full caseload your first day, that might not be a place you want to go to.
This is an interesting one. I've heard that if you take boards in California, it overrides the need to take the exam in most states. So if you take your NPTE, that covers you for all 50 states. Some states will have what's called a jurisprudence exam, which is a state test for their laws specifically, and you have to take that regardless. So I don't know exactly where you heard that, but taking it in California has nothing to do with the exam in the other states. A question about investing. I think that's a little bit more in depth than we can go in this Q&A,
Yeah,
but check out some of our stuff on
Index funds, though. It's mostly what we
check
invest in.
out Jared's Fifth Wheel PT articles for investing advice. Do contracts clinics usually have a grace period? Okay, so it looks like some people put stuff in the Q&A and the chat box. Is there a certain amount of rent that you would need to pay your parents if you signed a lease with them? What would be realistic, or would it depend on the area?
So the requirement is that it is market rent. So it is dependent on the area. So the best thing to do would go somewhere like Facebook Marketplace or Craigslist, see what rooms are renting for in that area, and then have a lease and pay that amount to make sure everything is all your I's are dotted and your T's are crossed in that case.
What are some other reasons for not paying off your student loans quickly besides the tax break for travelers?
The main reason that we chose to do it is that we were confident that we would be able to earn a higher return in investments than the interest rate that's accumulating on the loans. So that would be the primary reason to do it. But yeah, the getting a lower payment and tax benefits of paying interest on the loans. There's a variety of reasons, but the main thing that would make you choose that is that if you think that you'll be able to get a higher return investing than on the interest of the loans.
Yeah, but definitely a very personal choice there. Again, Jared's written a lot of articles about our choice to go on an income-driven repayment plan and kind of defer our loans and then do investing instead. So if you guys want to read more about that, you can check out his finance articles at fifthwheelpt.com. For a lot of people, it just makes more sense just to go ahead and pay them off to have that peace of mind to be done with them. But I do know that a lot more people did this strategy during COVID because the loans were put on hold for a while and they weren't having to make payments. So a lot of people were putting their extra income into savings at that time, kind of how we did through our whole career. So again, personal choice, but hopefully we can give you guys some more insight into all these financial decisions if you decide to take the course or check out some of our articles and videos we offer on our website.
Yep. Is that all?
I think that's it. Thank you guys again so much for tuning in tonight. We appreciate it. We love to talk about this stuff. We've been doing it for years, and we love to educate you guys if you'd like to get started with travel therapy. Again, reach out to us if you have any questions, and you guys can use the discount code. Special thanks to Physiogram for having us. We appreciate you so much. And use the discount code just for the Physiogram followers if you're interested in locking in that discount.
Yeah, remember, this is just a brief overview. We only had an hour. We can talk about this stuff forever. So we tried to keep it concise. If you do have any questions, though, feel free to ask and we will do our best to answer.
Yeah, seriously, there's so much that we could go into about travel therapy. Even our condensed course of everything that we know through all these years is still 12 hours of valuable content, which is still going to save you a lot of time and money just to sit down and watch that 12 hours straight through or break it up. But again, I hope you guys enjoyed this. Thanks again for having us, and we'll talk to you soon.
Yep, take care.